Hey there, it is Christy. Thank you for joining me on this. I don't think a lot of people are going to watch this. It's a pretty obscure little niche area, the book, The Construction of Reality. But if you are here watching this, it's because you're part of my book club. So hello, and sorry for the bad audio in the intro. I think I might have had the desktop audio on at the same time as the music file. It makes it sound bad. Doesn't matter right now. We're in the show. Anyway. Hi! For those of you who are going to be following along or trying to read the book along with us, The Social Construction of Reality by Berger and Luckmann, this episode is a follow-on from the sort of lecture 0 or video 0, which discussed the location of where this book kind of falls in the world and some of the important concepts. Before we have a look at the actual text that we're going to be that makes up the introduction chapter, I think it might be helpful for people who are not academics to understand a little bit how academics talk to each other, because this book does a lot of things that I recognize, but it might be a little bit unapproachable for a lay reader. Because this book was not really written for the public. A lot of this is written for people who have an academic outlook. And what I mean by that is, when you are training to become an academic, and as an academic, your job is knowledge production. At the end of the day, you're doing research or theorizing, observations, you're engaging in theoretical speculation, whatever your field is, but the point of it is to produce knowledge. It's to put information, facts, theories, whatever it is out into the world to help us understand it better. When a person goes to write a book in a field and their intended audience is their peers, which I kind of get the sense this book really is aimed at people who know a lot of the philosophers that are mentioned, for example, in the introductory chapter. The first thing you kind of have to do is lay out what your issue is, what you're going to address. And then you have to carve out the space that you're going to be filling a knowledge gap. Because again, we're knowledge producers as academics. Ultimately, that's our tasks. That's our main task. And the way that you do that is you kind of give a lay of the land, and you say, okay, so I'm going to address this theoretical topic. This theoretical topic has already been brought up, because inevitably it has, because we are living in the 21st century and people have had a long time to think. So you have to go back and kind of look at the original person who wrote it down and other important people who've come up and picked up the idea, or adjacently in a different field kind of came to a similar conclusion, whatever it is. You have to kind of set the outlines of the scope of what you want to talk about. And then you have to also point out where they have yet to make a contribution, or where nobody has talked about something, or there's a gap in our understanding, or there's a gap in our knowledge, or we've looked at it from this perspective, but not this perspective. We've looked at it in this time period, but not that time period. We've looked at it with this population, not that population. You have to make a contribution to knowledge. And so the first way you do that is by laying out what already has been talked about, by whom, what they said, and what hasn't been talked about, and that's why your book is needed, or your article, or your grant proposal, or whatever it might be. Because of fair use, I'm allowed to use, I think, up to like 10% of every chapter, or one chapter out of a whole book. So because I'm confined within my fair use parameters, I'm just going to go through the introduction and kind of do a summary of their longer discussion and bring out the highlights that I pay attention to on the second reading. Actually, this is the third reading now, because I read it once to read it and highlight it, and then once to reread it and go through all the highlights and see if I had done like what the story was that came out of that. So that's what this introduction chapter is really trying to do. It's setting out the topic, the question. What is my question? To what is my answer? Well, then read the rest of my book. Where have we come from in the literature, and what hasn't been addressed yet? So they start with their introductory. They open, quite strongly early on. They're saying the contention of the book is to say that reality is socially constructed, and that the sociology of knowledge, or that is the study of people producing knowledge, must analyze the process in which this occurs. What is the process by which societies develop knowledge? What is known? How do they come? What is the process by which this happens? Not within an individual psychology, but within a society or a group of people. We're talking with we're reading sociologists here. They also specify that unlike our earlier theorists or philosophers, for their purposes, they're going to define reality in a pretty limited way because it can be a very contentious subject. So they say they're going to define reality as a quality appertaining to a phenomenon we recognize as having being independent of our own volition. We can't wish something away, for example. And they're going to define knowledge as the certainty that phenomenon are real and that they possess specific characteristics. So it's quite an open and vague definition that they're working with in order, I think, to give them some conceptual flexibility later on. And it is in this admittedly simplistic sense that the terms have relevance both to the man in the street, and they're going to, even though they're talking about the social construction of reality, they're going to be unreflexively sexist in their texts, like in terms of who they assign, traditional gender roles. It's very sort of 1950s, 1960s. The person in the street, we would say today, and to the philosopher. And by this they mean people have different understandings of the word real and the word knowledge, depending on kind of where they sit in life, if they're just being daily life or if they're being philosophers. But they want to clarify at the beginning the sense in which they're using knowledge and reality in the context of sociology, and that they want to immediately disclaim any pretensions to the effect that sociology has an answer to philosophy. They're not interested in giving a true and perfect answer to what is reality. They want to look at the process by which people come to understand their reality and the knowledge that is contained within it. So the person in the street does not ordinarily trouble him or herself about what is real and what he or she knows unless, stopped short by some problem. People take their realities and their knowledge for granted. I think if we reflect on this, we know there's a lot of sort of common sense approaches to the perceptions of reality that end up not really corresponding to reality so well. The sociologist cannot do this. It is because of his or her systematic awareness of the fact that men or women in the street take quite different realities for granted as between one society and another. The sociologist is forced by the very logic of his or her, their discipline, to ask, if nothing else, whether the difference between the two realities might not be stood in relation to the various differences in the two societies. So what we're saying is that variation comes from the fact that humans socially construct these understandings. Okay, jumping ahead a little bit, they kind of do some reality knowledge stuff again. We're going to kind of skip over. They give some examples, like what is real to somebody in Tibet who's lived as a monk might be quite different from the reality of understood by an American businessman or person. And so what they're saying is that knowledge has contextual relationships, contextual frameworks, and therefore you can't speak to knowledge as like a universal thing. All right, so therefore they say here, the need for a sociology of knowledge is thus already given with the observable differences between societies in terms of what is taken for granted as knowledge within them or in them. All right, so they want to know there's variations. You just empirically look in terms of how people historically have told stories about the world and how it came to be and why it is the way it is, and they treat this as knowledge. But all of these are different. So if we have different explanations of the same phenomenon, then what causes this difference? And they're saying it's how societies create what constitutes knowledge. Yes, so a sociology of knowledge will not have to deal only with empirical variety of knowledge in human societies, but also the processes by which any body of knowledge comes to be established socially as reality, customs, practices, norms. So they write, it is our contention then that the sociology of knowledge must concern itself with whatever passes for knowledge in a society, regardless of the ultimate validity or invalidity by whatever criteria of such knowledge. So again, they're not looking to see which societies produce the best or most accurate or scientific yada yada. They just want to say it doesn't kind of matter what the society deems as knowledge. We're interested in how that status is attained. What does that process look like? And insofar as all human knowledge is developed, they write, transmitted and maintained in social situations, then the sociology of knowledge must seek to understand the processes by which this was done in such a way that a taken-for-granted reality congeals for the man in the street. In other words, we contend that the sociology of knowledge is concerned with the analysis of the social construction of reality. So I'm going to kind of hint ahead a little bit to say what they're pointing to is that customs that people, let's say, in a generation before me, decided voluntarily to do, like go out for, a certain thing every Thursday night, like go out for pizza every Thursday night, right? And this sort of elective custom, that they kept it up their entire lives, and they passed it on to their kids, and they handed down Thursday night pizza night to their kids. And their kids grow up and they pass it down. And they're kind of like, at some point, people might just think Thursday night is pizza night. Like, that's just the way it is. Like, it's always been like that. That's just truth. Like, this is part of our tradition. But it was really just a choice that people made and then repeated over time. Okay, so how are these truths about Thursday night pizza night, how do those come into being? They want to look at previous developments then. The next part of the section goes on. They talk about the term sociology of knowledge, or Wissensoziologie, that was coined by Max Scheler, and that the sociology of knowledge originated in a particular situation of German intellectual history and in a philosophical context. And because of this context, it's kind of influenced how popular or not this field they must say has been. And there are links between like continental philosophy and the sociology of knowledge. I'm referring by the chapter, and in the English-speaking Western world, we tend to prefer or lean toward or rarefy, make more important analytic philosophy over continental philosophy. So continental philosopher would be like a Hegel or Heidegger or Nietzsche. There's a whole bunch of French ones. Probably, yeah, I guess, I don't know if Derrida and Foucault are in terms of like the schools, because I kind of associate continental philosophy with more 19th century philosophy. But on the other side, well, I guess, you've got Bertrand Russell, who's a 20th century analytic philosopher. Wittgenstein started out as sort of more analytical, but drifted more toward the continental kind of school, as I would say. Analytic philosophy is more focused on sort of like logic and parsimony, whereas continental is it's a bit more grand in its scope. I don't want to get into that whole difference. There's a whole, so we're going to skip over that a bit. So let's just kind of skip ahead, because what they want to do here is then point out the ways in which earlier thinkers have made contributions to the idea of a sociology of knowledge that has informed their understanding, and which they might borrow from in terms of some ideas or adapt into a different situation, and acknowledging that, of course, is the important part of academic scholarship. So they say the intellectual antecedents of the sociology of knowledge are three developments in 19th century German thought: the Marxian, the Nietzschean, and the historicist. From Marx, this says from Marx, the sociology of knowledge derived its root proposition that man's, again, this whole thing with men all the time, consciousness is determined by his social being. And that obviously makes an important formation of a clear statement upon which you can ground something like understanding the sociology of knowledge. But the sociology of knowledge inherited from Marx not only the sociology of knowledge from Marx is not only the sharpest formulation of the central problem, but also of some of its key concepts, among which should be mentioned particularly are the concepts of ideology, ideas serving as weapons or tools, vehicles for social interests, and also the concept of false consciousness, which is it was an original contribution of Marxist ideology to explain how people can operate against their own self-interest. And for false consciousness, the thought that is alienated from the real social being of the thinker. Okay, maybe they have a different idea of understanding false consciousness as I do. But anyway, they go on to write, the sociology of knowledge has been particularly fascinated by Marx's twin concepts of substructure and superstructure, or Unterbau and Überbau. And then they said what concerned Marx was that human thought is founded in human activity. In other words, in your labor. in the widest sense of the word. And you're in the social relations brought about your activity. Brought about by this activity. So Marx, being an economic, critical thinker, was primarily looking at framing things in terms of people's social relations through labor, work, and interchanges. I'm going to skip kind of the substructure and superstructure because, one, I don't understand it that well, and I don't know how important it's going to be later on. If it will be important, then they'll bring it up. In terms of Nietzsche, they say the important contributions of Nietzsche include anti-idealism. It added additional perspectives on human thought as an instrument in the struggle for survival and power. Nietzsche developed his own theory of false consciousness in his analysis of the social significance of deception and self-deception, and of illusion as a necessary condition of life. Nietzsche's concept of resentment as a generative factor for certain types of human thought was taken over by Schiller, who's a philosopher or thinker they mentioned before. But most generally, though, one can say that the sociology of knowledge represents a specific application of what Nietzsche aptly called the art of mistrust. I don't know much about this, so that's like something for me to work on as we go on. They also then make a nod to William Dilthey and his historicism. The dominant theme here was an overwhelming sense of the relativity of all perspectives of human events, that is, of the inevitable historicity of human thought. The historicist insists that no historical situation could be understood except in its own terms, could readily be translated into an emphasis on the social situation of thought. Basically, where you stand depends on where you sit, or where you sit depends on where you stand. I think both of those. Basically, the relativity of all perspectives on human events. So certain historicist concepts such as situational determination, Standortsgebundenheit, I think, and seat in life, or Sitz im Leben, could be directly translated as referring to the social location of thought. And then they go on and discuss Schiller and some of the links there, and I'm not going to get too much into it. They talk a little bit about, this is kind of important. The society, all right, I guess I'm going to have to read through this. Schiller argued that the relationship between the ideal factors and the real factors are clearly terms that are clearly reminiscent of Marxian super and substructure schemes was merely a regulative one. That is, that the real factors that regulate the condition under which certain ideal factors can appear in history, but not the content of the matter. So society determines the presence of facts or information, but not necessarily the nature of the ideas. We'll kind of get onto this. I don't know if I have a good grasp of this myself, so I'm just going to read the last long sentence and then we'll move on. The sociology of knowledge, then, is the procedure by which the socio-historical selection of ideational contents is to be studied. That is probably a sentence that could take a while to unpack, but it is being understood that the contents themselves are independent of the socio-historical causation and thus inaccessible to sociological analysis. This is getting pretty high-level stuff, and I think that I would probably need to take a bit more time. We're just going to skip over this for the moment and see if we can wrap this up. Okay. So I think this is a restatement of the earlier thing, but in maybe a slightly clearer way. Within this intentionality and inevitably modest framework, Schiller's analyzed in considerable detail the manner in which human knowledge is ordered in society. He emphasized that human knowledge is given in a society as an a priori to individual experience. Let's think about that a little bit. Human knowledge in a given society is a priori to individual experience. You are born into a society that has already systems and sets of knowledge and forms of transmission and all kinds of things before you have any personal experience. You're already located in that social situation, and also provide the latter with the order of meaning. So you're born into a society that already has what is knowledge, all these knowledge structures, processes, and values alongside them. This order, although it is relative to a particular socio-historical situation, appears to the individual as the natural way of looking at the world. So if you're born into, 21st century Britain, or 20th century Britain, and you're raised, or America or anywhere else, and you're raised, let's say, as a white person in a white culture with all of the privileges, this will appear to you as the natural world. Your location, your experience of it, whether you're born into a cis body, you're born into a trans body, in terms of your personage and where you locate, your sexual orientation, your ethnic background, all of those things you're going to be born into, and all of those things you're going to inherit already. So, and the other thing is, unless you're questioning or you're taught to question, because this will appear natural. I think reflectively about the fact that I didn't know anybody except Catholics for like most of my childhood. And I don't really think I quite got the concept of other religions and other people believing other religions until I experienced it. Like, I knew it as a theory, as a possibility, but it wasn't part of my lived experience. I wouldn't know what to do with it. So in terms of that, you can think about the way that, and that was perfectly normal to me because it was all I'd ever known. And that is how most people experience knowledge, as some sort of given, unless, we'll see that there's, areas of contestation. So Schiller called this the relative natural worldview, or relativ naturale Weltanschauung. I think that's right. Practicing my German here too. Of a society, a concept that may still be regarded as central for the sociology of knowledge. So again, we talked about, they introduced their main question, going back, kind of summing this up a bit. They talked about why it was important. Then they discussed earlier thinkers who made contributions, and they're kind of picking out those ideas after they've defined reality and knowledge and how they're going to use it for the purposes of this book. And now they're kind of pointing out a little roadmap as to some of these deeper ideas that they're going to be drawing on later on in this book. So we're going to skip Mannheim mostly. Mannheim here, society was seen as determining not only the appearance, but also the content of human ideation, for what we experience, with the exception of maths and at least part of the natural sciences. So then they conclude, or they mention from this, the sociology of knowledge thus became a positive method for the study of almost any facet of human thought. Mannheim, again, you used ideology as constituting here only a segment of an opponent's thought. Ideology constituted the whole of an opponent's thoughts. We're not going to go into this. So I think we're getting, hopefully, closer to the end, because there are more ideas here that they're going to draw on. But again, I'm not deeply informed on the philosophies of Mannheim in this case. I have known a little bit about Dilthey, Nietzsche, and Marx, and so here I think I would just recommend that you read the text, maybe looking at where I've highlighted them, and try to take this on board. This might be also useful for thinking. I'm sure it was when they were in the 60s when they were living. Mannheim also stressed that the power of utopian thought, which, like ideology, produces a distorted image of social reality, but which, unlike ideology, has the dynamism to transform that reality into an image of it. So, yes, there's a little bit more here. I'm trying to think. Manifest and latent functions, I think we're going to skip. I don't really want to speak to that too much. And there is a discussion here about the scope of ideology. This word ideology comes up a bunch. So, just scrolling through here. Okay, so then, yes, there is one thing that they mention that I do want to unpack a little bit. The interest of the sociology of knowledge on issues of how do we know, epistemological questions on the theoretical level, on questions of intellectual history on the empirical level. And they write, we want to emphasize that we have no reservations about the validity and the importance of these kinds of questions, but they regard it as unfortunate this particular constellation has dominated the discussion so far. And they would say that as a result, the full theoretical significance of the sociology of knowledge has been obscured. So they want to say that in including epistemological questions, like how do we come to know what we know in this process of knowing before we make something knowledge, and they argue is a bit like trying to push a bus in which you are already writing. So they're going to kind of skip the more the epistemological questions like how can you know how knowledge is produced, and look more at the processes, from my recollections. So I'm just trying to skim over here to decide what to bring out of this epistemological thing. And I think they're kind of dealing with why they're not going to deal with epistemological questions. And so if they're doing that, then we're just going to kind of skip, because again, fair use. So I'm going to come back down to what I think are more relevant issues as we go forward in the book. The sociology of knowledge must concern itself with everything that passes for knowledge in a society. They've said that before, they've now repeated it. As soon as one states this, one realizes that the focus on intellectual history is rather ill-chosen, or rather is ill-chosen if it becomes the central focus of the sociology of knowledge. Theoretical thought or ideas, Weltanschauungen, are not that important in society. Although every society contains these phenomena, they are only a part of the sum of what passes for knowledge. I think this is actually a more important thing to pull out of the introduction, is that if you think about how do we produce knowledge, and you're only thinking about scientists, and you're only thinking about people who are passing laws or medical discoveries, you're actually missing a lot of what is considered knowledge in society. So you have to widen that out. Right? As they write, only a very limited group of people in any society engages in theorizing, in the business of ideas and the construction of a Weltanschauungen, but everyone in society participates in its knowledge in one way or another. So they're not going to focus here on elites. They're going to try, through their sexist lens, they just have a very androcentric world framing in their language, and that might be a translation from the German too, because it's the text is itself has genders, or the nouns. Where was I going with this? Yes, but we're not just going to look at elites. Put differently, only a few are concerned with the theoretical interpretation of the world, they write, but everybody lives in a world of some sort. Not only is the focus on theoretical thought unduly restrictive to the sociology of knowledge, it is also unsatisfactory, because even if this part of socially available knowledge cannot be fully understood if it is not placed in the framework of a more general analysis of knowledge. And then they kind of criticize the exaggerating and the importance of philosophical knowledge. So they say, and kind of closing, again, this is why we're not dealing with epistemology. It will be clear that despite the exclusion of the epistemological methodological problem, what we are suggesting here is a far-reaching redefinition of the scope of the sociology of knowledge, much wider than what has hitherto been understood in the discipline. So they're saying this discipline came along, there was, Marx made some great ideas, Nietzsche also said some things that were cool, other couple of people that we're going to talk about, and then all of y'all are always spending all your time talking about how can we know, and what is the best process for knowing, how we can, ways of knowing. And they're going to say, look, we can't deal with that right now. We can't deal with that in this book, because what we think is, when you guys have been talking about the sociology of knowledge, you've been staring at mostly staring at your belly buttons. You've been looking at yourselves as thinkers and knowledge producers, but let's look out at the world, because everyone has knowledge. So let's widen the scope of the study, the process of how this comes into being, as opposed to getting caught up in the methodological stuff. Debates, I should say. All right, I think we're getting pretty close to the end. That they're going to borrow a lot from a lot of different thinkers, and then they say, here we are fully aware that in various places we do violence to certain thinkers by integrating their thought into a theoretical formation that some of them might have found quite alien. We would say in justification that historical gratitude is not in itself a scientific virtue. We may cite here some marks of Parsons, and basically they're saying, we're going to kind of draw on people as we please. And their purpose, indeed, is to engage in systematic theoretical reasoning. We're not going to talk about Durkheim, another important, one of the founders of the way that we do sociology now, applied natural science, the rules of the scientific method to the study of the social. One of the first people to do that on suicide. It was a very important contribution in that way. And I guess that was about it. They're going to kind of do their deference to Durkheim and say, let's see. The central question for sociological theory can be put as follows. How is it possible that a subjective meaning becomes objective facticities? That's it. This is actually like, how do subjective meanings become objective facticities or facts? Or, in terms appropriate to the aforementioned theoretical positions, how is it possible that human activity should produce a world of things? In other words, an adequate understanding of the reality sui generis, as I think is how you pronounce it, of society requires an inquiry into the manner in which this reality is constructed. So that is what they say. This inquiry, we maintain, is the task of the sociology of knowledge. So that is the purpose of the introduction. It's to give you that little roadmap. It's to make acknowledgments of the important thinkers that they're going to be drawing upon. It's also going to say, we are only going to deal with this one question, and we're not going to deal with this issues. And then they spend a bunch of time, well, not a bunch of time, but they spend some time going, this is why we're not going to deal with epistemological or methodological issues. We're just going to really stick to theory, but what we're going to do instead of spending time on epistemology and methodology, the tools of which you come to know what you think you can know, that's methodology, and then methods are the actual practices that get you the knowledge. So ontology, epistemology, methodology, and methods. But they're saying we're going to widen the scope from just labor or what other philosophers have done in the past or thinkers in the past have done when it comes to the construction of knowledge or the sociology of knowledge. We're not going to just do the ivory tower. We're just not going to do it in terms of labor. We're going to look at just general practices in all society and consider all forms of knowledge objects of our inquiry. So that, I didn't see you. I see you in the chat now, Marlo. The question is, and it's a very good question, because I hope you're happy at the answer. The question, Mario, I think it is. This is really super. Let me, the font is super small. Let me jack it up to like 125. Yeah, that's better. Yeah. Hi, Mario. Does not focusing on epistemology mean that this book is going to be purely metaphysics and ontology? No. I haven't read it for a while, but I think what it generally runs off of is a lot of thought experiments from my recollection. They kind of look more to empirical examples and thought experiments and in that sort of way. So it's not metaphysical knowledge. It's actually quite practical, and they're looking at it within a sociology, though. So they're looking at it not only in terms of how individuals do it, but then how it spreads through society and how society builds and constructs these attitudes or perspectives or knowledges that are shared and contested and renegotiated over time. So not pure metaphysics and not ontology. It's not philosophy, it's sociology. So it's grounded in the empirical. All right, I wanted to keep this short because, I didn't even mention, there's a Discord for this, and I tried to get the address for the Discord to put it in the thing, but I couldn't make it work before I went live. So I'll have to do it afterwards. Or actually, no, if you want to join the Discord, DM me, and because I want to screen it because I don't want trolls and things like that. But the idea is, I did put up something in the Discord for people to discuss and to look at, and I'm going to wrap up this introduction by looking at the practical implications of the social construction of reality in our life. So this was a tweet that I've shared in the Discord for the book club, and it's written by David McKenna, who I assume is an attorney at law or was an attorney, or maybe he just has a law degree. Anyway, I'm going to read this out because it is, I think, relevant to, it contextualizes in a very practical way the big questions that the social construction of reality book will deal with. Dave writes, something I've learned while in law school is about the social construction of crime. I worked in a legal clinic on wage theft cases where employers have improperly paid workers by not paying below minimum wage, withholding overtime or paid sick time, etc. Most theft is wage theft, meaning the dollar value of stolen wages is greater than the value each year of all burglaries plus robberies, shoplifting, and auto theft combined. Yet, wage theft is not a crime. If you steal $100 from your employer, Dave goes on, you will be arrested. If you call the police because your paycheck is $100 light, the police will tell you to go file a complaint with the Attorney General, and then the Attorney General will settle the case for between $50 and $200. That's not actually true because attorneys general only take on big cases with thousands of dollars at stake, but they will settle big cases typically by requiring the employer to properly pay what is owed. No jail, no criminal record. If the AG doesn't want to take the case, it will give you a private right of action to sue the employer in civil court for what you are owed, plus damages. It can take 6 to 18 months to win at trial, or months or years to collect on the judgment if you win. In short, we address the predominant form of theft in the United States with civil court cases, not criminal cases. We have literally defined wage theft not as a crime. Theft by you, a crime. Theft by your employer, not a crime. This is what we mean to say crime is socially constructed. Not all social harms are criminalized. Not all actors committing social harms are criminalized. I settled cases for $27,000 for 3 clients last year. We spent a month negotiating the non-disclosure agreement because the employer stated if all his employees sued him and settled like this, he would go bankrupt. His business model depended on wage theft. These employers go on to hold elected office. 45 famously used wage theft to improve his finances on construction projects, leaving a trail of victims in his wake. Some sued and he had to pay them. Others didn't have the resources to pursue a multi-year litigation and got nothing. What should we do about it? Criminalize employers or decriminalize theft or something else? So that when we talk about the social construction of reality and people want to say, oh, there's an objective reality and objective right or wrong, it's a perfect counterfactual. Would you say that if you steal something from someone else, that's a crime? Right. If I went to my job and I took $100 out of the till, should I be prosecuted? Yes. If my employer steals $100 from my paycheck by not paying me overtime or not paying me sick time or not paying me whatever, should they go to jail? Right. I'm going to end it here. How long have we been going? 45 minutes, a little bit less? That's perfect. I wanted to keep it to 30 and I talked too much. So, hope you guys found this helpful, interesting. I will open up a discussion in the Discord, and the other part of the discussion will also include when we should have a Zoom or a Google Meet or something to talk about the book. So until next time, enjoy reading The Social Construction of Reality by Berger and Luckmann, or Luckmann and Berger. I'm not sure who goes first. And until probably the next happy hour, I've been Christy. You've been awesome. Thanks to Mario for stopping by, and we'll see each other again really soon. Okay, bye.